Hello and welcome to Passing the Torch, an online Bible study with your host and teacher, Bob Clark. Yeah, that's me. And today we are starting a new study called A Brief History of Israel. And this is part of this overall set of studies that we have been calling a Mosaic of Bible Prophecy. When I had already recorded this lesson and realized that I needed to come back and re-record at least this chart because the outline has changed. If you were with us before when we had started this Mosaic of Bible Prophecy, you may remember that we had a series of 8 studies planned. Well, the outline has changed and we've combined some things. So we now have a series of 6 studies, and we're going to embark with this lesson on the second study, A Brief History of Israel. The last time we talked about an introduction to and study of Bible prophecy, where we gave an overall view of it. But now we're digging into it deeply. With the next study, not next lesson, but next study, it'll be World Empires Through the Eyes of Daniel, where we're going to go through the book of Daniel. That'll be followed in study 4 by a panorama of church history, where we're going to use Jesus' letters to the 7 churches in the book of Revelation, chapters 2 and 3, as our outline, and we're going to pull things from all over the place to study church history. Lesson or study 5 will be Jesus, the Revelation, and other prophets. And in that, we will use the book of Revelation. This is one where we combine things from what we did have with the 8 studies. So we'll use the book of Revelation as our outline and then pull in what Jesus said and what other prophets have said as we need to fill in the gaps there in the book of Revelation. And then we will finish up with, if it doesn't change again, finish up with study 6, Messiah the King, which will really be geared towards any Jewish viewers. So what we're starting on today is A Brief History of Israel, and I hope you can tell that I'm excited about this. Well, why are you doing a brief history of Israel when you're talking about Bible prophecy? That's what this lesson is about. And we'll do that outline here in just a moment on this lesson. But as I've gotten into this study, there is so much depth here. And what you're going to see is that we're only going to be touching the very high levels of the headlines, if you will, of Jewish history, because there's so much depth there. We can't cover it all because we would be here forever almost. But we're going to touch the headlines and we're going to go through Jewish history, laying a foundation for Bible prophecy. All right. Now, before we get off this chart, I'm going to draw your attention, if you can see the chart, so you're not just listening. If you've been with us before, you may know that in the past I've always been speaking from the library, which means I had a library backdrop with books and such. This time I have a different backdrop. So we are now in the Kidron Valley on the east side of Jerusalem. Well, not really. It's the backdrop. You get the idea. But I want to point out a few things. We're going to do it once and not again. And I've realized that I would never be a weatherman because I can't point to these things behind me. This corner right here, that is the corner, that is the southeast corner of the Temple Mount. That's the Temple Mount wall that you're seeing there. And, like I say, on the east side of Jerusalem, the Kidron Valley runs right down straight behind me. Over here, you probably can't see too much more than just a few dots. That is this huge cemetery that is in the Kidron Valley that some people say is the largest cemetery in the world, with over 150,000 graves there. So with that, that was the few interesting things here. There's a lot more, I know that. But let's keep going into A Brief History of Israel. All right. So this second study of the Mosaic of Bible Prophecy, A Brief History of Israel. What are we going to talk about in this? We're going to break down Jewish history, or the history of Israel, into chunks. All right, so we're going to start off with a couple of lessons that are the introduction lessons. Then we will go into uh, the first 2,000 years of human history, talking about from creation to the Tower of Babel. So really pre-Jewish history. And from there, then we're going to take Jewish history from then to the present in about 500-year chunks, which anybody that teaches Jewish history, if you've heard them before, which I've been listening to a lot of teachers over this past year and a half, really, as I've been preparing for these set of studies. Jewish history breaks down conveniently into about 500-year chunks. So we will talk about creation to Babel, or excuse me, after creation to Babel, we'll talk about Abraham to slavery in Egypt. We'll talk about the exodus from Egypt to the monarchy. So think of King Saul, King David, King Solomon. From the monarchy, and in that case, it is the divided kingdom, to the exile into Babylon. All right? That's typically referred to as the First Temple period. And then once they come back into the land, the return, that is, to King Herod, that's the Second Temple period. It really goes up to 70 AD. And then we have some strange words here. There's the Talmudic period, the Gaonic period, the Reshanim period, the Acharnim period. What are those words? They're Hebrew words that describe the main focus of Jewish history during those 500-year periods. And when we get there, we will explain all of those things. And then what I hope to do is finish up this study with Christian observations of Jewish history. And because I've been learning so much in this that I want to give you a different perspective than what I have viewed the Bible in the past. Doesn't mean what I've been viewing is wrong. It's just adding to it. I've gotten excited about this study of Jewish history, and I hope you do too. All right, so as I've went through this, I have went up and down at various times about, am I putting in too much detail? Am I putting in not enough? And just in turmoil. And my wife gave me great advice, is go back to what you are supposed to do in this online Bible study of Passing the Torch. So I went back to the original introduction lesson to Passing the Torch. So Passing the Torch is meant to deal with two big goals. It is to make the Bible enticing for every listener to desire to dig deeper. And I hope that you grab on to the excitement that I've had as I've been studying through all of this Jewish history, because I can't help but to, when I get into it, get excited about it, because I've learned all these things and it makes sense. The Bible makes more sense now, especially the New Testament. When I understand what happened between the Old and the New Testament, I didn't realize how important that was. But it is fantastically important to understand the context of what Jesus was saying and the interaction between Jesus and the Pharisees, etc. So, my two goals in Passing the Torch is to make the Bible enticing. I hope to make that the word exciting, but honestly, it isn't all exciting. And I know that my voice sometimes is just droning on, okay? I got it. But I'm hoping, that's my goal, all right? The second goal is to challenge every listener to know what you believe and know why you believe it. That has been one of my goals since I taught the youth group when I was in college. Okay? It is my heart's desire. Know what you believe and know why you believe it. That doesn't mean that I've got to convince you of what I believe. That's not the point. The point is you know what you believe. So how do these goals apply to this study? The Bible becomes even more alive when you have a better understanding of the history contained within and behind the scenes of the Bible. It is amazing how much more alive that it becomes. I want you to experience the enjoyment of learning that history and the excitement of reading the Bible all afresh, anew, with these kind of understandings. As I said, I'm going to be upfront with you. There are parts of this that will be boring. At least they're going to seem boring, which means they are boring. But the overall picture is fascinating. All right, so this first lesson is why study Jewish history in a set of lessons about end-time prophecy, that is eschatology. Why should we study? What does Jewish history have to do with prophecy? So, outline of what we'll talk about today, a loose outline anyway. Why study Jewish history? We're going to touch on shortcomings in our Bible study and errors in the study of the Bible. Not that everybody has, but that some people with certain focuses have. And then we're going to talk about what to expect out of this study. Why study Jewish history in a set of studies about end-time prophecy? That's a good question. Because I am finding out Jewish history is a study of Bible prophecy. Now, that doesn't mean that we're going to dig deep holes in prophecy stuff during this study. So if you are afraid of prophecy or just don't want to hear about prophecy, still come along with us, because we're going to touch on it, but that's not going to be our major focus. Our major focus is the history of the Jewish people. But both prophecy, so Jewish history is a study of Bible prophecy, both prophecy that is fulfilled and yet to be fulfilled. We see God talking to Abraham about what was going to happen and over the next 400 years, and we see, guess what? It happened just like God said. And so we're going to see a few of those things in here. It gives us appreciation for those things. It provides examples on how to interpret Bible prophecy. Provides illustrative types, which comes from the Greek word tupos, types, of many prophecies recorded elsewhere in the Bible. Okay? So it helps us to understand that. So why study Jewish history in this set of studies about end-time prophecy? Because the Bible's presentation of end times prophecy, now we always think of the book of Revelation, but it's grounded in the history of the Old Testament. If you study the book of Revelation and have no understanding of the Old Testament, you're going to miss it. Now, most people have an overall appreciation of the Old Testament, but there's some of this that goes into the depths of Jewish history. We're just going to be covering the very top level. But without that understanding of Jewish history, you don't understand Bible prophecy. Can't understand the end times without the grounding of the Old Testament. That's what I just said. All right, so because regardless of the prophetic aspects, if you want to continue to learn and understand more of the Bible, you have to learn more of the situations and context. Sounds like English class now, context. And context surrounding the Bible to give you a more complete picture of the Bible and of God. So in this study, we're not digging deep holes in the prophecy side of things. We're giving a background. We're building a foundation for when we study the Bible prophecy. So we're really going to be studying the Old Testament, the New Testament, or the context of the New Testament, and Jewish history since then. All right, so I use this early on in the introduction to the introduction, that is the study 1, which was the introduction study. And I use this chart, but I'm going to use it again. So in this study of the Bible, and whether it's a focus on prophecy or not, study of the Bible. So we can approach biblical study as if it's a mosaic. So think of tile, and you have a number of places for tile, and then you start placing the tiles in place. And you start, I'm starting to see a little bit, and then I get a little bit more of the picture, but I'm still really not sure what it is. And eventually you can see what God is trying to show us. So think of that as we go through Jewish history. And I'm going to give you, so I got this from somebody else, this idea from somebody else online. All right, so if you can see the chart, I hope you can. What is this pattern? You see different snippets that seem totally unrelated and interesting, but what is that? Until you back away and look at the whole thing, you don't understand what the pattern is. Bible prophecy is pattern. All right? Understanding God's dealings with man is pattern. Understanding what Jesus was doing, what his teachings were, is a function of pattern. You can't understand. So this is our problem, is too many people, they read their one little verse and somebody's little commentary on it, and they get their daily Bible verse. You're not going to understand the patterns of the Bible. You're not going to understand it until you start reading it, a chapter or two at a time, or more at a time, and start putting this together and be consistent with your reading. And I'm hoping that you get that idea as we go through this, okay? So, pattern. That's what we're looking for, is patterns in the Bible. In fact, the Jewish model of prophecy is only revealed in a study of Jewish history because of this pattern thing. So we think of prophecy as the Greek model, all right? What does that mean? Prediction and fulfillment. Prediction and fulfillment. That's what we think of prophecy as. And sometimes we put it in terms of, well, there's multiple fulfillments, dual fulfillment or multiple fulfillments. That this was prophesied here and it was partially fulfilled here and fully fulfilled later. That's closer to being right. But the Hebrew model of prophecy is pattern. What do I mean by that? In Ecclesiastes chapter 1, verses 9 and 10, this is King Solomon speaking. And I got it out of the King James because I like the King James for these verses. The thing that hath been is that which shall be. And that which is done is that which shall be done. And there is no new thing under the sun. Is there anything whereof it may be said, see, this is new? It hath been already of old time, which was before us. I've got a perfect example, real-time example for when I'm teaching this. So I am teaching this on March the 1st of 2026. Yesterday started the war against Iran to finally turn over the regime. So at the time that I'm teaching this, the Ayatollah has been killed, along with 40 of the top leaders. Could you imagine being leader 41? Okay, but this hasn't ever been done before. Oh yes, it has. Yesterday on the Dead Sea Scroll, I'm not going to explain all this right now. I want you to get curious about the things that I'm talking about. On the Dead Sea Scroll calendar, which is similar to the Pharisaical calendar that is in traditional Jewish history, but it's different by a few days. Yesterday was Purim. What's Purim? If you've never read the book of Esther, I strongly encourage you to read Esther. It's a great book. It's only 10 chapters, but the story is great. And you see God working on every page, even though he's never mentioned by name. Yesterday was Purim. Well, what happened in Purim? The Jewish people could defend themselves against certain annihilation that was coming at them from a guy in Persia. Oh, Iran. Nothing new under the sun. The thing that hath been, that's the same thing as what shall be. Okay? The Jewish model of prophecy is pattern. And we're going to see some of these patterns. That's part of the reason for teaching this, is to show here's what happened in history, so that when we get to talking about New Testament prophecy, we can look back and say, you remember when we talked about this part of Jewish history? So much of Bible prophecy was revealed as types, or in the Greek, typos. I never realized that almost the entire book of Genesis is prophecy. It's unreal of how much it is. There's a lot of symbols also that are in the New Testament that are only explained in the stories of the Old Testament. And by failing to learn Jewish history, we overlook both prophecy in the Bible and its fulfillment through the nation of Israel. We don't realize that 1948 was the fulfillment of prophecy, because that prophecy actually shows up in the Old Testament. We will not be talking about that as part of this study, not per se anyway. But you've got to learn Jewish history to understand the Bible. Now, changing subjects a little bit, there is a major error in systematic theology. What do I mean by systematic theology? Okay, so systematic theology. Almost any denomination has their official book of systematic theology, whether it's official or not. They typically follow a set of a systematic theology. What is that? Okay, so I'm going to show you a table of contents effectively from a typical systematic theology. What I want to show you is from Charles Ryrie's notes in the Ryrie Study Bible. Okay, so in the back of that Bible, in his notes, he has a brief overview of systematic theology. So it includes things like bibliology. Guess what that is? It's the doctrine or the study of the scriptures. Bibliology makes sense. Theology, that's the doctrine of God, the proper. Christology, the doctrine of Christ. Pneumology, or if you're pulling in the Greek, pneumology, okay, is the doctrine of the Holy Spirit. Pneuma has to do with air, breath. That's the Holy Spirit. Angelology, doctrine of angels. Satanology, guess what that one is? Yeah, doctrine of Satan. Demonology, doctrine of demons. Anthropology, doctrine of man. I know that there's also anthropology goes outside of theology as well. Okay. Hermeneutology, doctrine of sin. Soteriology, doctrine of salvation. Ecclesiology, doctrine of the church. Eschatology, doctrine of future things, doctrine of end times things. And so, no matter in all of these different books, systematic theologies, the contents may be different, but the outline for most all of them looks very similar to this. These are how they break down the study of theology. Well, it overlooks a doctrine consuming 5/6 of the Bible. Wonder what that is. How about Israelology? The doctrine or the study of Israel. How can we overlook what God points out? But yet it could be in some systematic theology books, but if so, it's in very few. So we're going to add, through this study, we're going to add that to what our understanding of theology is. How about that? Now, we're going to get into what I consider it to be a major heresy. Okay? I've recently seen a number of very, very good Bible history teachers. Their understanding of Bible history is great. But because of this error, they totally miss it on end times prophecy, on eschatology. So what is this error in understanding of the Bible by some people? It's called replacement theology. And I call it the destroyer of reasonable eschatology. All right. So it was addressed in a lot more detail in the introduction study that we, study 1 of this overall Mosaic of Bible Prophecy. It was covered in lesson 8a, differing interpretive approaches, covenantalism versus dispensationalism. So it's also referred to as covenantalism. I think that's my next point. Replacement theology, also known as covenantal theology or covenantalism, is the belief that the church has replaced the Jewish people as God's chosen people. It reduces God's multiple covenants with man to only 2. See, okay, I just looked at what my next note is, so I won't jump ahead. So, according to covenantalism, which the focus is on covenants, they look at it as there's the old covenant, that is the law, and the new covenant. And that's the only 2 covenants they recognize. It totally ignores the distinctions of the Adamic covenant, the Noahic covenant, that is the covenant between God and Noah, the Abrahamic covenant. It ignores that. It only looks at the Mosaic covenant. It ignores the Davidic covenant. So the people that are on the other side of this, that is dispensationalist, they actually dispensationalists believe that God treats people different in each of these covenants, these dispensations. He treated Adam and Eve before the fall differently than he did after the fall. He treated people before the flood different than he did after the flood. He treated people before Abraham different than he did Abraham and his children, because he had made covenant with them. Again, with Mosaic, with Davidic covenants. So, dispensationalists believe in all the covenants, not just Old and New Covenant. God has not replaced the Jewish people with the church. They have 2 unique beginnings and 2 unique endings, both of them specified in the Bible. The endings of both are specified in the book of Revelation. Don't confuse that. If you do, you will not understand Bible prophecy at all. Why is this such a critical issue? Good question. And why am I harping on it, so much? Because if you miss this, you will not understand eschatology, end times prophecy. Okay, if that was all, that would be one thing, but it requires significant twisting of the words of the Bible to justify it. Most of the people that believe this believe that all of prophecy was fulfilled in 70 AD. That God has quit working with the Jewish people, period. No. And that's one of the things we're going to show when we talk about from the New Testament period to present. We're going to show that God never took his hands off of them. If God reneged on an everlasting covenant with the Jewish people, how can we trust that he will not break his promises to the church or to us individually? That's a key issue. If God turned his back on the Jewish people, then he's not a God of truth. He's not a God of promise. We can't trust his promises. But I know we can trust his promises because he's never turned his back on the Jewish people. I know it looks like he did at times, but he never did. And we'll talk about that when we get there. It leads to a discounting or even a hatred of the Jewish people. This replacement theology is what brought about Adolf Hitler. Because the churches in Germany had adopted this replacement theology. So when he started talking about how bad the Jews were, the churches, oh, they're the Christ killers. No, they aren't. If you want somebody to blame for the crucifixion of Jesus, I'm him. It was my sin that he took to the cross. And if you believe in Jesus, it was your sin. We're the ones who killed Jesus, not the Jews. On top of that, it was the Romans. They nailed his hands and feet. So the Jews got a bad rap out of all of that. But when you hate the Jewish people, there's something else that happens. It brings a curse on those who believe this. That covenant that God made with Abraham, I will bless those who bless you. I will curse those who curse you. God was serious about that. Is that still in force? You better believe it. God's response to replacement theology. So went a lot more in depth when we taught it in that lesson 8a in study 1. But Romans chapter 11, verses 25 through 32. Actually, I'm just going to read a bit of this. Paul says, "For I do not desire, brethren, that you should be ignorant of this mystery, lest you should be wise in your own opinion." I like the King James Version. "Should be wise in your own conceits." So he says, I don't want you to be ignorant about this. That blindness in part, not fully, in part, has happened to Israel until the fullness of the Gentiles has come in. You see that word until? He did not say that blindness in part has happened to Israel forever. No, he said until the fullness of the Gentiles has come in. Verse 26. And so all Israel will be saved. As it is written, the deliverer will come out of Zion, and he will turn away ungodliness from Jacob. Not from the church. Now he's dealing with the church separately, but from Jacob. For this is my covenant with them when I take away their sins. This is the Apostle Paul saying this. He's quoting the Old Testament here. All right, God's view of the Jewish people. And so this chart, as we go through it, this could be a sermon series on its own. All right, but I'm not trying to get into it. I'm just trying to hit on these a few things. How does God see the Jewish people? As a special treasure. In Exodus chapter 19, verses 5 and 6. Now, therefore, if you will indeed obey my voice and keep my covenant, then you shall be a special treasure to me above all people. For all the earth is mine, and you shall be to me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. These are the words which you shall speak to the children of Israel. That's God talking to Moses. But the church is called a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. Correct. But he never said that Israel was not. He never went against that. Both the church and Israel are. They just need to re-recognize it. The Jewish people have not always obeyed. However, look what Jesus said about them when speaking with the woman at the well. Remember the story? And he comes to her and he tells her, go and bring your husband. And she says, I don't have a husband. He says, yeah, you speak right. You've had 5 husbands and the one you're living with now is not your husband. So Jesus talking to her said, you worship what you do not know. We know what we worship, for salvation is of the Jews, not the Gentiles, but of the Jews. Paul's comment, in Romans chapter 1, verse 16. For I am not ashamed of the gospel of Christ, for it is the power of God to salvation for everyone who believes, for the Jew first, and also for the Greek or the Gentile. The Jew first. The scriptures came through the Jewish people. Jesus and the disciples were all Jewish. No matter what you want to make them out to be, they were Jewish. Jesus was only sent to the Jewish people. What? Matthew chapter 15, verse 24. But Jesus answered and said, I was not sent except to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. Now, later on, he prayed for everybody that would come to know him through the preaching of the apostles. You can look that up in John, I think, chapter 17. But when he came physically, it was to Israel only. The early church was almost entirely Jewish. Open anti-Semitism and replacement theology came in when Rome, think of that as the world, took over the church. Approximately the time of Constantine, but it was building before then. The book of Revelation turns distinctly Jewish after chapter 4, with the church not being mentioned again as in terms of being the church, the ecclesia. It's a Jewish book. Only the first 3 chapters are Christian, and the last chapter or 2 in there. God is not finished with the Jewish people. All right. What would I expect for you to get out of this study? Good question. Start off with a fuller understanding of the entire Old Testament. A better understanding of Genesis, which sets the stage for the rest of the Bible. Some prophetic implications out of the book of Genesis. We're not going to go into a lot of depth, but there's some things there that we will point those out as we go. I would expect for you to get to see the importance of understanding the period between the Old and New Testaments, if you want to understand the undercurrents in the New Testament. I never understood how much I missed in the New Testament when I would read it, because I did not understand what had happened in that 400 years prior to Jesus. There was so much there. Why did Jesus and the Pharisees go at each other the way they did? There's some reasons behind that. And we will talk about that when we get there. So what do I want you to get out of this? That the Jewish people are a people of second chances, who belong to a God of second chances. Second, third, fourth. When Abraham was told to go to the promised land, to a land that God would show him, did he go? Well, he started, then he stopped halfway in the middle. Then he went on. Second chance. Go through so many times in the Bible. So after the Exodus, they went to the border of the promised land. Did they go in? Oh, we can't go in there because there's giants in the land. So they messed up. They had to wander around the desert for 40 years. Then they came back and they went in. Second chance. They're going to have a second chance to accept Jesus too. God has never taken his hands off the Jewish people. Sometimes his hands are hard to see. During the Holocaust, but his hand has always been there. He's always saved a remnant. And you see so much of teaching, Jewish teaching over the centuries. It's like they see everything but Jesus. It's that partial blindness. Not full, partial. Well, what we find out through Jewish history, we'll see all sorts of connections through the Bible and in Jewish history since then. Nothing in the Bible is there by accident. God connects events hundreds of years apart by cause and effect, as well as by prophetic types. Okay? Much of Jewish history is cyclical, that is, patterns, as we referred to. We'll see how close the Jewish people are to the truth without actually seeing it. But they're going to very soon. Romans chapter 11, verse 25. For I would not, brethren, this is what I already read, would not, brethren, that you should be ignorant of this mystery, lest ye should all be wise in your own conceits, that blindness in part has happened to Israel, until the fullness of the Gentiles be come in. And that time is coming to a close soon. So I am planning on having a chart like this in every one of these lessons. Important takeaways, because I know that in some of these lessons, we're going to cover different topics that don't seem like they mesh. So at the end, important takeaways. Important takeaways from this lesson. Without understanding the Old Testament, that is the Tanakh, and Jewish history, we will misunderstand much of Bible prophecy and miss much of its fulfillment. The church has not replaced Israel as the chosen people. The church and the Jewish peoples are distinct in God's plans. This study on Jewish history will support your learning of the Bible in biblical context, even if you don't enjoy talking about end times prophecy. Okay? So, this time we talked about why study Jewish history. Next time we'll talk about how to study history. And I'm calling it History 101, How to Study History. And we're going to talk about timelines and all sorts of stuff like that to give us a context of what we're going into. All right? And with that, I truly hope to see you next time here on Passing the Torch. So long.